Growing up, my life was anything but ordinary. My father, a strict yet caring man, raised me single-handedly after my mother passed away when I was just a little girl. For years, it was just the two of us against the world. But then came Amanda, my stepmom. She was everything I wasn't expecting. Beautiful, intelligent, and charismatic, Amanda turned heads wherever she went. I'll admit, I wasn't thrilled when my father announced their engagement. To me, it felt like she was invading a life that belonged to my mother and me. But as time went on, she worked hard to build a relationship with me, even though I kept her at arm's length. When Amanda moved in, she tried to blend into our lives seamlessly. She cooked meals that rivaled my grandmother's recipes, laughed at my dad's awful jokes, and even helped me with college applications. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about her was off. Fast forward to years later. By then, I was in my mid-20s, working my first real job in the city. Dad and Amanda were still going strong, or so it seemed. My visits home became less frequent, but Amanda always insisted on catching up whenever I did. She had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room. I figured that charm was just part of her personality, but looking back now, I see it differently. Then there was Joseph, my father's business partner. Joseph was about 10 years younger than Dad, with a magnetic personality that everyone gravitated toward. He was witty, polite, and had the kind of confidence that made people listen when he spoke. He and Amanda became fast friends, often discussing books, art, and other topics that flew right over Dad's head. At first, I thought nothing of their camaraderie. Amanda was outgoing and warm to everyone, so why should Joseph be any different? But one evening changed everything. It was a crisp autumn weekend when I decided to surprise Dad and Amanda with a visit. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Joseph's car parked out front. It wasn't unusual for him to be there. They worked on projects together regularly, but something felt different this time. I stepped inside to find the house unusually quiet. The smell of Amanda's signature apple pie filled the air, but the usual chatter was absent. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone home?" Amanda appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Elizabeth, what a surprise!" she exclaimed, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She seemed genuinely pleased to see me, but there was a slight tension in her voice that I couldn't quite place. Joseph walked in a moment later, holding a glass of red wine. "Well, if it isn't Elizabeth," he said with his trademark grin. "How's life in the big city?" I gave him a polite smile, but my attention was on Amanda. She looked different. Not in a physical sense, but there was an unspoken energy in the room that made my stomach churn. We spent the evening catching up, but the dynamic felt strange. Joseph stayed later than usual, and I couldn't ignore the way Amanda's eyes lingered on him when she thought no one was looking. It wasn't until Joseph finally left that things took an even stranger turn. "Elizabeth," Amanda said softly as we cleaned up the dishes, "I need to tell you something." I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the sink. Her tone was serious, almost nervous. "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But before she could respond, Dad walked into the kitchen, oblivious to the tension. "What's going on in here?" he asked with a smile. "Just catching up," Amanda replied quickly, her expression shifting into one of calm composure. But I knew. Whatever she was about to tell me, it wasn't something she wanted Dad to hear. That night, I lay in bed replaying the evening's events. Amanda's hesitation, Joseph's lingering presence, and the tension that hung in the air. It all felt wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but my instincts told me there was more to the story. The next morning, Amanda found me sitting on the back porch, sipping coffee as the sun rose. She stepped outside, her expression calm yet determined. "We need to talk," she said, sitting down beside me. I set my mug down, my heart racing. "What is it?" Amanda hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You know how close your father and Joseph are, right? They've been business partners for years, but lately..." Her voice trailed off and she glanced at me nervously. "But lately what?" I pressed, feeling my chest tighten. She exhaled deeply, as if summoning the courage to continue. Joseph and we've been spending a lot of time together. Your father asked me to help him with a project for the company. At first, it was all professional, but then her words hit me like a brick. But then what? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Amanda looked away, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Nothing has happened, she said quickly. I swear to you, Elizabeth, nothing inappropriate. But I feel conflicted. I care about your father deeply, but Joseph and I have this connection that I can't ignore. I stared at her, stunned. A connection? Amanda, what are you saying? I'm saying that I've been feeling things I shouldn't, she admitted, her voice barely audible. And it scares me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind raced as I tried to process what she was telling me. Does Joseph feel the same way? I finally asked. Amanda hesitated, and that pause was all the answer I needed. I don't know, she said, her voice trembling. We've never talked about it, but the way he looks at me, the way we seem to understand each other without saying a word. She trailed off, her words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, confusion, even a strange sense of pity. Amanda, you can't let this go any further, I said firmly. Whatever you think you feel, you have to put an end to it. My father doesn't deserve this. I know, she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. That's why I'm telling you. I need someone to hold me accountable. I don't want to ruin what I have with your father. The sincerity in her voice was undeniable, but it didn't erase the fact that she was teetering on the edge of a line that should never be crossed. As we sat in silence, the sound of footsteps approached from inside the house. Amanda quickly wiped her eyes as Dad stepped onto the porch. Good morning, ladies, he said cheerfully, oblivious to the tension between us. Morning, Amanda replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil I knew she was feeling. I forced a smile, but inside I was reeling. Amanda's confession had thrown me into a whirlwind of emotions, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get even more complicated. The rest of the weekend passed uneventfully, but the underlying tension was impossible to ignore. Amanda avoided Joseph entirely, and Dad remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. It wasn't until a few weeks later that everything came to a head. One evening, I got a call from Amanda. Her voice was shaky, almost panicked. Elizabeth, I need to see you. Can you come over? I hesitated, my mind racing. Is everything okay? Just come, she said, her tone making it clear that something serious was going on. When I arrived at the house, Amanda was pacing the living room, her hands clutching a piece of paper. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes wide with fear. What's going on? I asked, my voice laced with concern. She handed me the paper without a word. It was a letter, written in Joseph's handwriting. As I read it, my heart sank. In the letter, Joseph admitted his feelings for Amanda. He wrote about how much he admired her, how he couldn't stop thinking about her, and how torn he felt knowing it was wrong. My hands trembled as I looked up at Amanda. Does my father know about this? No, she said quickly. I found it in Joseph's jacket when he left it here after their last meeting. I didn't know what to do, so I called you. I stared at her, my mind racing. This was no longer just about Amanda's feelings. It was clear that Joseph felt the same way. We have to tell Dad, I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my head. No, Amanda said firmly. I can't hurt him like that. Nothing has happened, Elizabeth. We can handle this without breaking his heart. But I wasn't so sure. Secrets had a way of coming to light, and I knew this one was bound to explode if we didn't confront it head on. Amanda's plea hung in the air, heavy with desperation. She paced back and forth, her words tumbling out in a rush. I'll talk to Joseph, she said. I'll tell him this has to stop. We've never crossed any boundaries, Elizabeth, and I won't let it go any further. I need your help. I folded the letter and placed it on the coffee table, my mind a storm of conflicting emotions. On the one hand, I wanted to protect my father from pain, but on the other, I knew that keeping secrets like this rarely ended well. "You can't keep this from Dad forever," I said firmly. "Secrets have a way of surfacing, Amanda, and when they do, it's always worse." Amanda stopped pacing and turned to face me, her eyes brimming with tears. "I know," she whispered, "but I just need time. Please, Elizabeth, give me that." Reluctantly, I nodded. "Fine, but you need to handle this, Amanda. Soon." She promised she would, and for a while, things seemed to calm down. Amanda distanced herself from Joseph, and I kept a wary eye on the situation, hoping that she would follow through on her promise. Weeks turned into months, and for a while, it seemed like everything was back to normal. Dad and Amanda were happy. Joseph seemed to be focusing on his work, and the tension that had once filled the house had dissipated. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was far from resolved. And I was right. One evening, I was at the house for dinner when Joseph unexpectedly dropped by. Dad greeted him warmly, as usual, but I couldn't ignore the way Amanda stiffened when he walked into the room. "Joseph, what brings you by?" Dad asked, clapping him on the shoulder. "I just wanted to drop off some documents for our next project," Joseph replied, his tone casual. But his eyes flickered to Amanda for a brief moment, and I felt my stomach tighten. As the evening wore on, the tension became palpable. Amanda avoided Joseph's gaze, and he seemed unusually quiet. After dinner, Dad suggested a game of cards, but Joseph declined, claiming he had an early morning ahead. When he left, Amanda looked visibly relieved, but I knew better. This wasn't over. The breaking point came a few days later. I received a frantic call from Amanda, her voice barely coherent through her sobs. "Elizabeth, I messed up," she cried. "I need your help." My heart dropped. "What happened?" "Joseph came by earlier," she admitted, her voice trembling. He confessed everything to your father." The words hit me like a freight train. "Everything? Amanda, what do you mean by everything?" She took a shaky breath. "He told your father how he feels about me. He didn't say we'd done anything, but he admitted his feelings." "Your dad is furious, Elizabeth. I don't know what to do." I grabbed my keys and drove to the house, my mind racing. When I arrived, the scene was tense. Dad was in his study, his face etched with a mix of anger and betrayal. Amanda sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, tears streaming down her face. "What's going on?" I asked cautiously. Dad looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. "Did you know about this?" he asked, his voice cold. I froze, unsure of how to respond. "Dad, it's not what you think," I began, but he cut me off. "Not what I think?" Joseph admitted to having feelings for my wife, Elizabeth. "What am I supposed to think?" I glanced at Amanda, who looked utterly defeated. "Dad, nothing happened between them," I said firmly. "Joseph's feelings are his own, but Amanda hasn't done anything wrong." "She should have told me," Dad snapped. "Instead, she kept this from me. How am I supposed to trust her now?" Amanda spoke up, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said. "I was trying to protect you, to protect us. I never wanted this to happen." For a long moment, the room was silent. Finally, Dad stood up and ran a hand through his hair. "I need some time to think," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. Amanda nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Dad left the room, and I turned to Amanda. "What now?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "I don't know," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." The weeks that followed were tense. Amanda and Dad went to counseling, trying to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Joseph quietly distanced himself, and eventually he left the company altogether. It wasn't an easy road, but over time the wounds began to heal. Amanda worked tirelessly to prove her commitment to my father, and slowly he began to forgive her. As for me, I learned a valuable lesson about love, loyalty, and the power of honesty. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it's always better than the alternative. And while I'll never forget the events that unfolded that year, I'm grateful that, in the end, my family found a way to move forward. Together.